Hey guys, it's Bakington back at it again, and today we have yet another Disney villain cookbook recipe. Today we'll be traveling to the world of the Little Mermaid to make the poor unfortunate rolls. Now, I saw this in the book and thought definitely this is something that I have to do. It looks super fun. Look at these colors. That's fantastic. And I mean, it's essentially just a cinnamon roll. How hard could it be? So, I thought this would be a really good recipe to share with all of you. Besides, who doesn't like The Little Mermaid? It's definitely one of the more popular Disney princess movies. Not, again, one of my favorites. I'm gonna say this pretty much every single time I'm ever asked, ever. But if it's not Tangled, I don't care. But that isn't to say that Ursula is not an iconic Disney villain. There's merchandise of her like literally everywhere. And that The Little Mermaid isn't like one of the most impactful pieces of media in the last, what? You there, how long has The Little Mermaid been out?
Over 30 years.
Over 30 years, okay. Then in the last 30 years. Clearly I didn't put a lot of effort into researching this topic. Now with cinnamon rolls and pretty much any other yeast-raised product, you gotta start with the dough first because that's gonna take a lot of inactive time while it rises. So, let's get started. For this recipe, you will need 3½ cups of flour, ½ cup of white sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, an egg, a stick of butter that you've split in half. This is all the butter you need for the entire recipe, and we're only going to be using half of the butter for the actual dough. 1 packet of instant yeast. This, however, just came out of a jar, and a packet is roughly 2¼ teaspoons of yeast. And in here, we've got 2/3 of a cup of milk and 1/4 cup of water. Now, this is a very simple recipe. All we gotta do for this part is combine our sugar, yeast, and salt in our bowl and mix it up. What we typically do is prove your yeast first in the liquid. So whatever liquid is used in this recipe, you would mix your yeast into that, and once it kind of developed a little bit of a foam, you knew that the yeast was active and well. But this recipe calls for you to throw the yeast directly in with the sugar and flour, which isn't terribly surprising. A lot of commercial baking is done this way. Now, before we do anything else, we need to head over to the stove to warm up our milk and melt our butter. In a saucepan over a medium heat, add in your water, milk, and your butter, and allow everything to heat very gently until the butter is melted and everything is nice and combined. Now that everything is nice and melted, I'm going to pour A into B, making sure that this is only like body temperature. So if you stick your pinky in, you shouldn't like have to recoil in pain or be like, ooh, that's a little warm. It should just be noticeably pleasant. You don't want this too warm because you don't want your yeast to die. Yeast can't stand too high of a temperature, so anything over like I think 105, don't quote me on that, we'll put it somewhere here, is too high for the yeast. So make sure you have your temperature below that. But our bodies are naturally at around, 98 degrees, so if it feels all right to you, then it should be fine. I'm gonna crack in my egg. I should have made a bigger crack. Too late to go back now. There we go. And now we're going to mix all this together into a dough. And I personally like to start with a spoon for the simple reason being I hate the way wet dough feels on my fingers, which is funny because I'm a baker, that's what I do. But there's just this weird, I hate it, this weird like bad texture thing. But once it gets to around here, see it's soft, a little fluffy, not terribly sticky or wet. Clean your spoon off, And I'm gonna begin mixing everything together into a dough. This is an important step. Your dough should be soft, but not wet and sticky. If your dough is too sticky, it's because you probably used a really large egg, which is why I believe the recipe calls for between 3 and 3½ cups of flour, depending on the size of your eggs. My eggs are pretty large, so I use 3½ cups of flour. But if you use like medium eggs, then perhaps you probably should only use 3 cups of flour. or else your dough might be a little bit too dry. Speaking of dry, if your dough is too dry, just add a tablespoon or two of milk at a time into your dough until you get something that's soft, but not like gloopy. See how it leaves my hands fairly clean, it doesn't stick to the bowl, and it's easy to knead. So, now I'm gonna knead this in the bowl for 10 minutes. I needed a break after all that, but I've kneaded my dough now for 10 minutes. It's nice and smooth and elastic, springs back to the touch. So, I'm gonna put it back into the bowl. We're gonna cover it and leave it for an hour to double in size. The recipe says an hour to 90 minutes. Make sure you don't leave it somewhere too warm though, or else it might develop a little too fast. Alrighty now, it's been a minute. Hi, welcome back. I've changed, it's risen for I don't even know how long at this point. It's been several hours. Life kind of just gets in the way. But it's time to finally roll out our poor unfortunate rolls. So, let's get started. For this section, I've got my puffed up dough, some brown sugar, the remaining quarter cup of butter, some nutmeg, and some cinnamon. On a lightly floured surface, we're going to turn our dough out. It's not nearly as puffy as I anticipated it being. However, we didn't bloom the yeast in the water or milk. It was kind of just mixed in, which can sometimes not always work as well as we hope. But I'm just going to squeeze it a little bit to degas it, and then we're going to roll it out into a 16 by 10 inch rectangle according to the instructions. What I like to do when I'm rolling something out like this that you want in a specific shape is I kind of like to pinch the edges out into a rough approximation of that shape every now and again while I'm rolling it out to help it keep itself in that rough shape. Got myself a fabric tape measure here, and let's see, we're at 16 and okay, 11, but close enough. Close enough to the 16 by 10 they want. So now we're going to apply our butter, our spices, and our sugar. Just like spreading it on bread, you're going to spread your butter on with a knife or spatula right up to the edges on this side, but the wide ends leave about a ½ inch margin where you don't put any butter or spices or sugar. This way it will roll up easier. There we go. Now we're going to sprinkle on ½ a cup of brown sugar. I'll just spread it on my hands like this. Kind of sprinkle the brown sugar over. Again, going right along with the butter, trying not to get any on the long edges. Now, we gotta add some spices. First things first, we have 1 tablespoon of ground cinnamon. And since I still don't have any ground nutmeg, I'm gonna go ahead and grate some over. We need ½ a teaspoon of nutmeg. Again, watch your fingers, this is very sharp. Now, if you were making this for yourself, this would be where you would add like anything else you want to put in. Like some people like raisins. I like raisins. Derek likes raisins. But do you like raisins? It's one of those really hotly contested things. Lots of people do. Lots of people don't like raisins. But whatever your opinion on raisins, it doesn't matter because it's time to roll your buns up. Starting from one end, and there's a roll. I like to roll away from myself, but you might like rolling towards. Keeping it tight, but not too tight. If you roll them too tight, you'll end up with cinnamon pyramids. Now take the clean end and kind of just pinch it. roll. That's clearly didn't work. I'm gonna moisten the end. How about that? Some water along one end. Now wet my fingers. Moisten the edges. And it should stick. A little bit easier. There we go. Now with a sharp knife, cut this as evenly as you can into 12 segments. I like to start by cutting it in half, and then cut one half into thirds, and then cut those thirds in half. Well, they might not look that impressive, but I'm sure they're gonna taste fantastic. So, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put these into a 13 by 9 pan, greased, or what I'm going to do is line mine with some baking paper. And once they're in the pan, we're going to leave them covered to rest for another 20 minutes. Now, the book says to knead your dough. Don't do what I do, do what the book says. The book says to knead your dough at the beginning and for only about 5 to 10 minutes. And then after that, let it rest for 10 minutes, roll it out like this, then let it prove, do its long proving for the bread while it's in this form. That's when you do your long proving. But since we already did our proving to give the bread its flavor, we're going to let it puff up for only a couple of minutes, maybe about 20 minutes in the pan. All right, it's been about 20 minutes that our rolls have been proving just on the counter. Now we're gonna throw them into a 375-degree oven for around 28 to 30 minutes or until lightly browned. Now, while our buns are baking, it's time to work on the frosting. So, for this frosting, we've got 1 cup of powdered sugar, 2 tablespoons of milk that I've added a teaspoon of vanilla to, and some purple food coloring. So, it's very easy. Add A into B. And level with me here. Is this or is this not pink? These look pink to me. Now, I could be a dumb man who is colorblind, but those look pink. But the recipe calls for purple food coloring. Purple food coloring we will give it. I'm gonna start with just a touch. Oh, this is already way too purple. Oh well, can't go back now. Now here's the thing, friends. I almost failed color theory, so I don't know how you can get pink from purple or vice versa, but I'm sure someone smart back home probably does. My glaze is looking a little thick for my liking, so I'm gonna add just a touch more milk. That's probably too much, but I'd rather have it too runny than too thick. And there we have a very pleasant purple glaze, which looks nothing like this. Look, see, I'm not making stuff up. Purple food coloring. Does that look like purple? Alrighty everyone, it's now an even ungodly longer amount of time since we last spoke, and it is time to glaze our buns. They just came out of the ovens. I'm gonna go grab them for you. Ta-da! Look at these cinnamon buns. They're a little soft and a little crispy. They're a little all right. You can definitely tell that these are cinnamon buns, that's for sure. They're poor and unfortunate, definitely. So at least they live up to their name. But they, I don't know, leave a little bit to be desired in the size department. I was hoping they would puff up a little bit more, but they kind of didn't. I'm going to glaze all of them, but for aesthetic purposes, I'm going to put one on a plate and glaze that one for you. They're soft, sort of. They peel apart. Tastes pretty okay. But it's time to hit it with some totally not pink purple glaze. Now I gotta say, this looks very pretty, very aesthetically pleasing when you put the purple glaze, excuse me, pink purple glaze on it. So I can't imagine this being too bad. I mean, it's a cinnamon roll, how bad can it be? Okay. All right, so I'm a level with you. It's not great, but it is good. What I am tasting, it's really weird. This bread dough, it's kind of dense and dry, but it's good. Here's the thing. I figured it out. The butter and the dough itself together, because there was butter in the pan and butter in the roll, all that butter kind of cooked the bread in such a way that it kind of tastes a bit more like a funnel cake, like a really fluffy funnel cake, rather than a cinnamon roll proper. It's very good, but I'm kind of missing the cinnamon. It's there, but it's not very pronounced. But it is a very pleasant pastry nonetheless. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy, like, comment, subscribe down below. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the recipe. If you want to get your own Disney Villains cookbook, check the links down below. I will put a link down below to where you can get the cookbook as well as any of the objects you saw here today, like that grater. But in the meantime, I'll see y'all when I see you next time. Peace.